Liam, what is best in life?
To crush your enemies, to see them driven before you, and to hear the lamentations of their woman.
Hey friends, I'm Cammie.
I'm Liam.
And this is the show where I introduce this here 13-year-old to classic movies from the 80s and 90s. This is from Mad Max to The Matrix. This week was kind of a spotlight on 1982. So what did we watch?
Conan the Barbarian, Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, and Blade Runner.
You've got a bit of a head start on movies when it comes to 1982. You've already seen Dark Crystal, The Last Unicorn, and Secret of NIMH. Do you remember those movies well enough?
I remember the Dark Crystal.
The Last Unicorn was the one...
The one literally about the last unicorn.
Yes. And then she jumps into the ocean at the end. Do you remember Secret of NIMH? The one about the rats?
I don't really...
They lived in the farmer's field.
I don't really remember that one.
You don't really remember that one?
The same way I don't really remember the last unicorn.
Okay, that's fine. So we can just mention Dark Crystal. Dark Crystal was, of course, another Jim Henson, Frank Oz movie. Jim Henson Studios did all of it. As far as that movie, would you give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down?
A thumbs up.
Thumbs
Definitely.
up? Yeah, I remember you really, really liked that one. So let's go ahead and talk about them in the order that we watched them. So we'll start with Conan the Barbarian. We always do 5-star ratings. The rating is 1 star hated it, 2 stars didn't like it, 3 stars liked it, 4 stars really liked it, and 5 stars loved it. How would you rate Conan the Barbarian?
5 stars. There was always something going on.
Yeah.
It was never like, let's introduce these characters. Well, there was some introduction, but it was always introduction with action.
Yeah, the movie doesn't require a lot of explanation. It just kind of keeps going.
Yeah,
I agree. How would you summarize the plot of that movie? Like, what's a good summary of the movie is like when we went to Barnes & Noble and I handed you a copy of The Fault in Our Stars and I said, well, it's about this girl who's got terminal cancer.
Yeah. And
she's an author and she wants to go meet her favorite author. So that's kind of what I mean by a summary of the movie. So how would you summarize Conan?
Conan the Barbarian loses his family and goes on a mission to murder the person who killed all of his family.
Yeah, sounds about right. Some context. So the movie stars Arnold Schwarzenegger, who you've seen before in the
Terminators.
Yep. This movie was his first big breakout role. He had done some other stuff. He was a bodybuilder before he was an actor, which, I mean, look at him. Of course he was. But this was his first big breakout role, and he did this, and then he did Terminator. And off the backs of those two movies, he just became a huge star in the 80s and 90s. And then went into politics.
I mean, I'd elect him.
Yeah, he's a really interesting guy. So, Thulsa Doom, you remember him. Mm-hmm. Did you recognize his voice?
No.
The actor is a guy named James Earl Jones, and he also did the voice of Darth Vader.
So he's good at playing bad guys.
He is very good at playing bad guys, yeah. He's just got one of those voices.
One of the bad guy voices.
Yeah. So Conan was based on, back in the 30s, there was a guy named Robert E. Howard, and he wrote a bunch of books about Conan. And so the movie is based on those books. Those books also were one of the primary inspirations for Dungeons & Dragons.
They were?
Yeah. I don't know if while you were watching it, it felt kind of like, a little bit like watching a D&D game. Like I mentioned, this is what happens when you have a party of nothing but rogues.
Yeah. Sneak, 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 stab, 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 stab.
The movie also started a trend. Okay, so the style of fantasy it does is what's called sword and sorcery. And so the movie kind of started, it was so popular, it started a trend of a lot of other movies trying to imitate it. So kind of like when we talked about Mad Max 2, how that had a whole bunch of people imitating it, Conan did kind of the same thing. There were a lot of imitators. And
when you have good movies, you have a lot of people wanting to make movies like it.
Yeah, pretty much. Do you have any questions for me about Conan? You had asked one thing yesterday when we watched it about the giant snake.
Yeah, I was just wondering how they did it.
Okay, so
like how do they chop it in half?
So the way they do it is, if you're ever curious about effects in a movie, watch when there are cuts, because there could be so much time between cuts, but the way that it's put together, you might not notice. For the most part, that was a puppet. It was a giant puppet that moved around. But then it gets pinned to the wall by Sabotai?
Sabotai.
Sabotai?
The archer.
Yep.
Thief.
The thief and archer. It then cuts, and the snake's not moving, and Conan's chopping its head off. So it was basically just a prop that was made to come apart, and was full of fake blood
And muscles.
Yeah, it was a really, really good, good prop. This whole movie, like, it looked really good. It didn't really use miniatures that I'm aware of, so it was a lot of just giant sets and big puppets and
Double-bladed axes.
yeah, the costumes, the props. It was all really, really well done, and that's what people talk about production value. So it's basically how much money went into making it look good and how much effort went into making
I'm
it look
guessing
good.
a lot.
Yeah, that movie had a lot of effort. It was also written by a guy named Oliver Stone, who went on to be a pretty big director. I don't know that we're going to be watching any of his movies, but for the people following along at home, yeah, it was written by Oliver Stone. So I was going to ask you about the pacing of the movie, but you already said that you didn't feel that it was slow at all.
No.
The only reason
The slowest part was the beginning.
Yeah, it's because there's so much story that gets packed into the beginning of the movie. It's seriously 20 minutes before Conan has his first line.
Yeah. He grunts a lot before that.
Yeah, he does.
That's really it, though.
There is a lot of grunting before that. Oh, that movie is so brutal. With all the pit fighting that he does, like, just so much blood. What would you say the movie is about? Like, the theme and the meaning of the movie?
Careful who you hurt, because they might come back to hurt you.
Yeah, that's a very, very good one. It's a good example of a revenge story. Conan has a really interesting character arc of kind of coming to terms with that, and, like, he can't do everything on his own, because when he tries to go get revenge on Thulsa Doom on his own, he literally gets killed.
How did he get killed again?
He
got pinned to the tree.
Yeah, he got pinned to the tree, and it doesn't matter how many vultures he bit the necks out of.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that. Vulture started biting him, so he bit the vulture back. Or he bit the vulture back.
What was the part of the movie? There's a part of the movie that you laughed really, really hard. Can you tell everybody what that was?
Oh, yeah. He punched a camel in the face.
Yep.
He walked through the desert, backed into a camel, and he turned around and he punched the camel right in the face.
Yeah, when he and Subutai were wandering around all drunk towards the beginning of the movie. Yeah, I love Conan. It's not... The other two movies that we watched have a lot of really deep meditations on things. Conan isn't. Conan is basically what you see on the surface, I think.
Sometimes you need that.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. It's got more going on than, like, Raiders of the Lost Ark, because, like, Conan changes over the course of the movie, where he kind of learns to calm the F down a little bit and not punch every camel he sees.
And every person he sees.
Yeah. Oh, God, he did so much of that. Let's get into the next movie we watched was Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. How would you rate that one?
Probably a 4. Because I felt like there were points that were slow in it.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Because unlike Conan, it didn't pack all of its story into one spot.
Yeah. So could you summarize Wrath of Khan?
Two people go on a mission to a apparently desolate planet to see if there's any life on it to do a scientific project. They find a group of people, then worms in their head to get them to do what they say.
That's a good summary of the first act. Absolutely. You've never watched the Star Trek thing before. That's your first introduction to Star Trek, right? Clearly you liked it.
Yeah.
So let me tell you a little bit about what led up to that, because you kept asking, and I think we touched on it briefly last episode, but you kept asking, why are we starting with the second one?
Yeah.
So Star Trek was a TV show that ran from 1966 to 1969, and then got canceled, but then kind of became really popular with reruns in the 70s. After Star Wars in 1977, they decided to make a Star Trek movie that came out in 1979, Star Trek the Motion Picture. But a lot of people didn't like it because it's really long and really slow.
How long is it?
I think it is I'm not sure the runtime, but it ends up being close to like 2.5 hours, I want to say. It's too long, in my opinion. But it's really for people who were already fans of Star Trek. So it's not a very good introduction. But because that movie was so poorly received, the guy who created Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry, was kind of kicked off making a sequel. So he wasn't involved in making Wrath of Khan. So they kind of started over again with Wrath of Khan. It looks completely different. It's a very different movie. And it got a lot of people excited about Star Trek, and it kicked off a whole series of movies after this one. In my opinion, this one's the best one, but
Every time that we saw Kirk's son being like, I think they're trying to do something bad, I was like, no, they're not. That's the thing.
Yeah, David, the whole Kirk and David thing I think is really neat because he doesn't trust
Anybody.
Kirk. It's mostly Kirk that he's mad at. It's touched on briefly that he feels like Kirk abandoned he and his mom, but we find out that Carol asked Kirk to not be involved in David's life because she didn't want David to be running off doing Kirk stuff.
Guess makes sense.
Running off on adventures and whatnot. I have a question for you about Khan and Khan's story about his whole revenge plot. Did that make sense to you? Did it all...
Yeah.
The movie explain everything? It's actually based on an episode of the TV show. It's a kind of a sequel to an episode of the TV show called Space Seed. So what happens in Space Seed is the Enterprise is out and about and they run across this derelict ship called the SS Botany Bay. And then when they get there, they find Khan and his crew in like a cryogenic storage. So in Star Trek back in the 1990s, there was something called the Eugenics Wars, which they made all these kind of genetic super people.
Like Khan.
Yep. And Khan was one of the leaders of kind of that uprising in that war. So he killed a lot of people. He was a war criminal. So they just kind of sent Khan and his crew off.
So he killed people in war.
But he wasn't a soldier. He was more of a conqueror murderer. He wasn't just fighting a war. That's why there's a line where he says, I was a prince 200 years before you were born.
Oh, yeah.
That's what he was referring to. So he and his crew get stranded on SETI Alpha 5 in the episode.
Which everyone thinks is SETI Alpha 6.
Yep, in the movie everybody thinks it's SETI Alpha 6. So I wasn't sure how well it would work for someone who hadn't seen the episode. But apparently it works just fine. And based on people's audiences in 1982, it worked really fine for them too. Do you have any questions for me about Wrath of Khan?
How do they do the worms?
It was a puppet.
The worm was a puppet?
Yep.
The head was a puppet?
Yep. It was a prosthetic head that the worm kind of crawled into the ear.
Ugh.
Yeah, it's one of the grossest parts. When I was a kid, that whole part just grossed me out so bad.
Just...
Yep.
I don't know what's worse. The scene where it crawled in or the scene where it crawled out?
Yeah, both are pretty gross. I mentioned it while we were watching it, and I'm not sure if you remember. The guy who played the captain, the Reliant captain, whose name I can't remember. Hang on a second.
Chekhov?
No, Chekhov was the first officer. Terrell. Captain Terrell. I had mentioned he...
Wait, we're gonna be talking about another guy named Terrell pretty soon. Blade Runner?
Oh, that was Tyrell, but yeah, very close. But anyway, he played the police detective in Terminator. Do you remember him?
You mentioned this, but no, I do not remember. I don't actually remember him.
You'll remember him in a couple of weeks, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
It's been a few months since you saw Terminator. A good 6 months or so. But yeah, you'll recognize him again when you see him. I also think that the Yoda puppet looks just like him. I don't think it was intentional, but I always think that the Yoda puppet looks like him.
Wait, who played him?
He was played by a guy named Paul Winfield. Let me show you a picture of him.
He died?
Yeah, he's been dead for a while. But I always thought the Yoda puppet.
Yeah.
Actually, this picture's a better one.
The worst part is it actually does.
I know! So what would you say the theme or the meaning?
Pretty much the same as Conan.
Yeah. Star Trek, when it's good, has like a lot to think about. It has a lot of deeper themes. It's kind of, in my opinion, one of the reasons that Star Trek works. Like, so much of the original series was like about racism and stuff, which was a big problem in the 1960s.
The show was racist, or the show was about people being racist?
It was about addressing and conquering all the racism that was prevalent in the country. The show wasn't racist. The show actually had the first interracial kiss ever on television. It was between Kirk and Uhura. Yeah, so...
Did everyone who watched it get angry? Or pretty much everyone?
A lot of people did. A lot of people got angry about that episode. There's an interesting story about that episode. They ended up shooting it from a couple different angles. So, like, there was one angle where you could definitely see that they were kissing, and there was another angle where you couldn't really see it. And William Shatner intentionally messed up that particular take, so they only had the one to use.
So they only had the one that perfectly showed it?
Yep. They couldn't get away from having that on screen. It also, having a black woman on the crew was a big deal. They also had a Japanese guy on the crew, the Sulu, because there was just so much racism in the U.S. back then. It's a good thing that's all gone away.
I mean, there were some funny parts of the movie, like how Kirk beat the Kobayashi Maru test.
Yeah. This movie has some pretty deep themes about kind of facing life and death situations and kind of how do you deal with all of that. And Kirk's whole arc through it is he doesn't want to deal with the fact that he's getting old. He doesn't want to deal with the fact that his friends might not be around forever because like everybody's career is going in different directions. The whole fact of the Kobayashi Maru is kind of reinforces the fact that he's never had to really face that he cheated on the test.
Yeah. Well, no, he didn't cheat. He just rewrote the test so that he could win.
He kind of cheated. But he's never had to deal with it. It wasn't until, spoilers, Spock dies at the end that he has to deal with actual life and death situations. Was that scene emotional for you when Spock sacrifices himself?
No.
No? Okay. It was a big deal for people who were fans of the show because they'd spent so much time getting to know Spock. Another thing about the Vulcans, did the fact that they were so logical and emotionless, did that come through for you?
Yes.
Okay.
Because the fact that he did that meant that he knew what he was doing.
Mm-hmm. And his declaration at the end of, I don't remember exactly how he puts it, but I have always been and always will be your friend, which is a big deal.
That was exactly what he said, actually.
Okay, I was good. I nailed it. So it deals with a lot of that, but it also deals with a lot about revenge and how Khan, being so consumed with vengeance, really kind of ended up killing him in the end. It ended up destroying him.
He detonated Genesis.
Yeah, and so he was just so consumed by that rather than kind of like accepting the fact that it was a mistake.
I mean, on the bright side, he created a new planet.
He did. He created the Genesis planet.
But then again, he got rid of a whole nebula to do it.
Yeah, the Mitaru Nebula. I love the end of that movie. They wanted to make a movie that was... Because like after World War II, there were a lot of movies that were like submarine movies, like submarine combat movies that took place during the war. And so they wanted to kind of emulate some of that with the ships kind of trying to outmaneuver each other and loading torpedoes and stuff.
Yeah.
And I think it does a good job. I think it's a great movie. We're not going to watch any of the direct sequels to this one, but we will end up watching another Star Trek movie when 1996 rolls around.
Wait, which one is that going to be?
They stopped numbering them after Star Trek 6, so it's the 8th one. Yeah, it's the 8th one, First Contact. And we'll talk all about how they're connected when that rolls around. The direct sequels to this one, they were pretty good, but not nearly as good as this one. And there are other better movies that we're going to watch. Okay, let's talk Blade Runner. How would you rate Blade Runner?
Probably a 4. I mean, the pacing was a little worse than Star Trek, but the action definitely made up for it.
Yeah.
And the emotion.
Yeah, that movie, I would use the term meditative, because that movie spends so much time... Exactly. The movie spends so much time kind of talking and thinking about stuff without stuff really happening. So I agree. How would you summarize Blade Runner?
Crazy scientist named Terrell decided to build genetically engineered people that then revolted, so now they have to kill all the genetically engineered people they created.
Yep, basically. I saw context. I'm sure you recognized the person who played Deckard. Did you? It was Harrison Ford.
Oh! I mean, he looked familiar at the time, but I didn't really think on who he was.
Yeah, that was. It's the third week in a row that we've seen him, and we're going to see him again next week.
Wait, what was the first time?
He played Han Solo.
Han Solo, Indiana Jones, and Deckard.
Yep, and we're going to see him as Han Solo again next week.
We're going to watch another Star Wars movie?
Yeah, we're watching Return of the Jedi next week. The movie was directed by... Shit, I forgot his name. Oh, okay. I remembered. The movie was directed by Ridley Scott, who also directed Alien. This is the movie he made after Alien. Back in that first episode, I mentioned that Alien, I thought, was Ridley Scott's first movie. It wasn't. He had done a couple other lesser-known movies in the 70s. But it was Alien and then this one that really made him popular. This movie also, after it came out, it kind of started a trend of this kind of science fiction.
Fake people?
Fake people. It's... The genre of science fiction is called cyberpunk.
Not fake people, just really, really good people. Really strong people.
Yeah, the genetically engineered superhumans is a big part of it. But the genre of science fiction is called cyberpunk.
I've definitely heard that term before. I
Yeah,
just didn't know what it meant.
I'm sure you have. Cyberpunk became more popular with a book that came out a couple years later called Neuromancer, written by William Gibson, which is a really, really good book. But a lot of the themes of Cyberpunk are kind of dealing with what happens when technology and humanity kind of start to merge, and kind of like, how do we maintain humanity, and what does it mean to be human anymore at that point?
I mean, you asked me that question yesterday that I don't even know the answer to it.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the things that the movie meditates on, is what makes us human. Do you have any questions for me?
No.
Yeah. So when we got done watching the movie, I threw a question at you that I wanted you to think about. Do you remember what that question was?
Is Deckard a replicant?
What do you think?
I think that he is not, because no, wait, now let me think about it. It would make a lot of sense, because he doesn't like killing the replicants, and at the same time, even when Leon was throwing him into that, whatever he was throwing him into, was a truck?
Yeah, some kind of truck.
He wasn't really getting hurt too much. He was bleeding, but not like a bone would have been broken at least.
Yeah, I agree that I feel like he would have been a lot more injured. The movie never really answers that question. It starts to bring up the question when Rebecca asks him, have you ever taken the Voight-Comp test?
Was it Rebecca or Rachel?
You're right, it was Rachel. Is her name. But when she asks him, did you ever take the test yourself? It starts to bring up that question, but it never really answers it. And there's a lot of evidence that would tell you one way or the other, but the movie never really answers it. The sequel answers it.
What's the sequel?
The sequel came out in 2019, which is when the movie takes place, called Blade Runner 2049. And it...
I thought that... I knew it was something like that, but I thought it was Blade Runner 2047.
No, it's 2049, because it... Yeah, I think. I don't remember. I don't know. I didn't like the movie very much. After the movie came out, and for a long time, the director said one thing about Deckard being a replicant, and the actor said the opposite. So, like, one of them thought that he was, and one of them thought he wasn't. There are some other things, like, replicants are kind of emotionally immature because they've only had a few years. So, like, they might have a lot of... Like, if it were D&D, they'd have a lot of intelligence, but not a lot of wisdom, because they haven't spent much time...
They have a lot of intelligence, a lot of strength.
Yeah.
Not a lot of charisma, though. I don't
know. I feel like, for the most part, no. But I feel like Pris did.
Yeah, and Rachel.
Yeah, I keep forgetting that Rachel was a replicant. Like, that was the whole point.
She was human. She was pretty much human.
Yeah, and her being a replicant really brings up the morality of, is it okay to be killing these people? Because they're people. Just because they don't have memories.
I mean, they do have memories, they're just not their memories.
Rachel had memories. The other four didn't. Roy Batty and his crew didn't have memories beyond what they experienced on the off-world colonies. There's also a bit where Deckard has a dream of a unicorn, and then later on, the other cop, the one who does all the origami.
Yeah, like the paper thing at the beginning.
Yep, he makes a little duck, and then he makes like a matchstick guy. When he's been at Deckard's place, he leaves a little origami unicorn. Did you notice that part?
I did notice that.
That's some of the evidence that people give for him being a replicant, that the guy knows that he has these dreams. I can't think of anything else to mention about Blade Runner, aside from the fact that it's kind of a meditation on what makes us human.
How did they do the nail? Because I'm pretty sure we saw the nail poking out the other side.
Yeah, it was just a fake hand that the nail went through. That's why the skin kind of stretches and pops like that. And then after that, it was just a prosthetic that was glued to his hand.
Now that I think about it, when you press down on this muscle or something, it does this naturally. So maybe he was trying to open his hand like that.
Maybe. What I think he was trying to do was that kind of intense pain and feeling was keeping him alive, because he was right on the verge of shutting down.
Yeah, he shut down at the end of the movie.
Yep. Right after he saved Deckard. Actually, that's a good question. Why do you think Roy Batty saved Deckard at the end? There's no wrong answer.
I think he saved Deckard because if he let Deckard die, then he'd be no better than any of the other replicants.
Yep. I feel like he kind of understood right at the moment of death, he understood that being human was kind of important and life was important. The same thing that Deckard was struggling with there at the end.
Yeah, when he said it's time to die, I was wondering if he was talking about himself or if he was talking about Deckard.
Yeah, but then he releases the dove and shuts down, has his little monologue and kind of shuts down. I also love his monologue about all the things that he remembers, all these horrible things that Tyrell made him do. or that he was built to do when he was a slave, and just all that stuff kind of is going to be gone. The actor who played Roy Batty was named Rutger Hauer, and after this, he went on to be in a whole lot of science fiction movies.
Oh, how did they do the scene where he squeezes Tyrell's eyeballs out? Was that like a prop?
Yeah, I believe so. That it was another prop puppet that he jammed his thumbs into his eyeballs.
Gross.
Yeah, real gross. Yeah, I can't think of anything else to ask you about that one. Oh, actually, let me ask you one other thing. What did I do?
You pressed something.
I opened up wish.com for some reason.
You used the paper and pushed it.
Oh, so the second movie answers the question about whether Deckard is a replicant or not. I'm not going to give you an answer, but what do you think the sequel says?
I think it says that he is a replicant.
Okay, that's a good guess. It does. It says he's a replicant.
Yeah.
I'll give that away. Okay, so next time we're going to be doing 1983, and the movies that we're going to be watching are Scarface and Return of the Jedi. Two movies that are very, very similar. For anyone
They
watching...
are?
No, they're not at all. They're very different movies. I think you will like both of them for completely different reasons. All right, so thanks for sitting down with me. I appreciate it, as always. Did you have any final questions for me? Anything that you want to add before we say goodbye?
No.
All right, well, again, thanks for sitting down with me. I appreciate it, as always. For those of you following along at home, if you end up wanting to support the weird little shenanigans that Liam and I are doing and all of my other internet shenanigans, you can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/CarmillaTLV, Carmilla like my name, CARMILLA, and then the letters TLV, like the lost Volkswagen. I don't know. And you can also, if subscriptions aren't your thing, you can also throw money in my tip jar on PayPal, paypal.me/CarmillaTLV. And say goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Goodbye.